This happened close to 20 years ago, back when I was 15. My parents were in the midst of a really ugly divorce at the time, and my mom thought it would be a good idea for me to spend a few weeks with my great-aunt Lucy in upstate Vermont, while they sorted out the legal stuff. I wasn't thrilled about being shipped off to some relative I barely knew, but I didn't have much choice. Aunt Lucy lived in this massive Victorian house that had been converted into apartments sometime in the 60s. She owned the whole building and rented out the top 2 floors to tenants, while she lived alone in the sprawling first-floor unit. The place was beautiful in a very specific, old-fashioned way. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, intricate moldings around every doorframe, movie-type stuff like that. What struck me as odd right away was that Aunt Lucy seemed to avoid certain parts of her own apartment. She had this huge master bedroom with tall windows and beautiful antique furniture, but she slept in a small den off the living room instead. That was actually one of the things I asked her about, to which she just replied that the main bedroom got too much morning light. I then stupidly asked if I could sleep in there then, to which she just glared at me disapprovingly. You gotta remember that things were a little different back then, and respecting your elders was practically law. So after that interaction, I held my tongue, not wanting to upset her further. The first few nights I was there, I kept hearing what sounded like someone walking around in the apartment above us. I figured it was just one of the tenants, maybe someone who worked late shifts. But the weird thing was how methodical the walking sounded, back and forth, like someone pacing the length of the apartment. After about a week of this, I couldn't keep things to myself and mentioned it to Aunt Lucy over breakfast. She again gave me this strange expression and said the second floor had been vacant for over a month. I insisted that I'd been hearing someone walking around up there every night, but she just shook her head and told me I was just hearing the building settling. Her explanation didn't make sense, but I wasn't about to argue. The next morning, I told Aunt Lucy I wanted to see the vacant apartment. She seemed reluctant, but I kept pressing, and eventually she agreed. Just like she said, the second floor was completely empty. But as we walked through the rooms together, I saw something that immediately validated what I'd been hearing. There were fresh scuff marks on the hardwood floors, like someone had been walking the same path over and over. The marks formed a clear pattern from the front of the apartment to the back, exactly matching the route the footsteps seemed to make each night. When I pointed this out, Aunt Lucy said the marks were probably from the previous tenants, but they looked too recent for that. I told her this, but she just dismissed me like I was some babbling child. That evening, she suggested we watch a movie together, which we'd never done before. As it got later, the footsteps from upstairs started up again. I looked at Aunt Lucy, expecting her to finally acknowledge what we were hearing, but instead, she just turned the volume up and pretended like nothing was happening. I was stunned. My first thought was, Aunt Lucy knew exactly what was going on, and just didn't want to tell me. The next day, I called my mom and mentioned the situation. And you know what's crazy? Even my mom seemed to know what was going on. She told me not to bring up the footsteps with Aunt Lucy anymore, and that it was, quote, a sensitive topic. One night near the end of my visit, I woke up around 2 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. As I was walking back to my room, I glanced toward the staircase that led up to the second floor. The door at the bottom was slightly ajar, and I could have sworn I saw a faint light moving around up there, like someone was walking with a flashlight. I immediately went to bed, and did mention it to Aunt Lucy. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. If it hadn't been for that night the two of us watched a movie, I would have assumed Aunt Lucy was causing the footsteps, but that was impossible. My mom refused to explain things to me when I got back home, and this actually caused quite the rift between the two of us. Years later, I found out through a cousin that Aunt Lucy had sold the building and moved to Florida. According to my cousin, there had been some kind of incident in the apartment back in the 90s. Someone had died there under unclear circumstances, and the family had tried to keep it quiet. That was also around the time Aunt Lucy had inherited the building. I've never believed in ghosts. I don't say that to sound dismissive or close-minded. I just genuinely don't. I think that's a pretty dumb way to interpret things you don't understand, to be frank. So when I think back on what I experienced in that house, I always find myself searching for some other explanation. Maybe Aunt Lucy was sheltering someone up there, a relative in trouble, or someone who needed to stay hidden. Or maybe she was being blackmailed, forced to let someone live in her building without anyone knowing. Maybe the incident my cousin mentioned wasn't as closed as the family wanted to believe, and whoever was responsible still had some kind of hold over her. Or maybe the entire thing was completely made up, and my cousin was needlessly gossiping. I really don't know. What I do know is that my mom knows something, and I'll never forgive her for withholding that information from me. I think this is just one of those things that will never have an explanation.